Welcome to the Faces podcast. We're a Christian and Muslim charity working to build resilience in faith communities against child sexual exploitation and other forms of harm. We'll be talking about what faith and interfaith work means to us and how we embed an inclusive and authentic approach.
Welcome to our podcast. Today, Melissa and I will be heading up the podcast, but we've got a special guest, Courtney, with us. And Courtney has some experience of working with refugees, and what we're looking at today is sort of an update on our story in November, where we were looking at what the Home Office was doing. We're now several months on from that, and so it's worth looking at how things have developed. We've also got a little bit to look at on some of the local scene, or some of the difficulties around some of the housing of people. And so we want to have a look at that as well. But you're very welcome to join us. And Courtney, it's wonderful to have you with us. And you've been working, and I'm guessing your heart's engaged with working with refugees and things like that. And so it'd be wonderful to hear from you. Wonderful if you could introduce yourself a little bit to us, and also tell us a little bit about how you got involved in refugee work, or what caught you up in that. And that would be wonderful to hear from you. So welcome.
Thank you. And thanks for having me and for the invitation. My name is Courtney. I have been involved with migration and refugees for around 2 years now. I've always had a strong interest in migration, and I think particularly migration in this country and in Europe when it comes to refugees and asylum, because it's always been quite a politically charged and quite, unequal in this country process. And it's kind of piqued my interest in that sense. And that kind of drove my motivation to study a master's, which I've just completed. So I did a master's in humanitarianism, aid and conflict at SOAS. That was very difficult, but really, really enriching. And I learned so much about the realities of this situation and the policies and the whole structure of migration here, which was, really, really eye-opening. And that kind of drove me to know that that's the avenue that I want my career to go in. So while I was studying, I was also volunteering with a refugee charity, a national one, and then I've continued that work in Luton, and also support some other local organisations as well. So we kind of provide advocacy, support, practical support, a range of different services. And that's been kind of the biggest connection for me to see the realities of the people and the journey and the stories, really putting a face and a person behind all of these statistics and, kind of quick quotes that you hear on the media. That's kind of been my motivation, and a bit about the work that I've been doing so far.
I think that's fantastic. To have studied to that depth on it, you've probably seen the good, the bad and the ugly.
Absolutely.
Not only in your studies, but also hearing stories from people as well. What would you say is the biggest thing the last 2 years have shown you? What's the biggest thing you think you've learnt, or what's surprised you, or something that stood out to you over that time? Because it's in-depth study. I think that's fantastic.
Yes.
You know stuff.
I do. Don't put me in pressure. Don't ask me, specific statistics and numbers, but I do know quite a bit now compared to before. And I think that is actually one of the things that has been the most kind of revealing and, really helped me understand the whole situation better, is the fact that people, the general public, don't actually have that much understanding and knowledge, and the misconceptions, misinformation that is put out in the media and by the government. That was the most eye-opening kind of experience through my studies, is to really question and critique, and not in terms of criticism, but to question and investigate what you see, what you hear, and what you kind of hear on the ground from the public. So for me, understanding now the fact that, over 70% of asylum claims are approved at the first stage, and then after that at appeal, over 50% are approved. So the reality is that actually the large majority of people that do come here to claim asylum are accurately refugees, they are claiming asylum based on, fair grounds that anyone should have the right to do. But when you look at the media in various ways, it's not just tabloids, it's kind of all over the UK. That's not the perception that you receive. And it's very much a rhetoric around threat and, fear. So that has been, I'd say, the most eye-opening kind of situation that I've seen.
Yeah. I think that's very interesting. So, to hear those numbers that are sought to be genuine, the people seeking asylum, I think that's really powerful in that, that's not the general view. That's not how people see things. But I think in some ways that is not an easy process that they go through.
No.
So that's a stringent process that produces 70% getting through first time and 50% of those that reapply getting through.
Yeah.
And that's not the British government going, oh, we won't even look at the paperwork. That's them drilling down, trying to find any excuse to say, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. It's exactly as you describe. It's not an easy process. It's not people slipping through the net because of a lack of, scrutiny and investigation in their case. The process that people go through here, during claiming asylum and when they get to their substantive interview. So just to give a quick overview of the process, they will arrive in the UK, they will be processed and screened and given a kind of first interview to find out the grounds that they're here on. And then the waiting game happens where they're waiting for their substantive interview. And that's the decision-making interview. So that process can go on for a kind of an undisclosed amount of time. There's no real guidance around how long people will wait. I've supported people that have only waited a few months, and some people are still waiting, and it's been over 18 months since they've had their screening interview. But that process is more, I thought, in my opinion, like an interrogation rather than an interview to, determine what their case is and what the situation is. And there's been, people that have been rejected on discrepancies as small as, something very traumatic that has happened to them. And they've reported, oh, maybe it was a Wednesday or, in their screening interview. And when it gets to the substantive, they said Thursday. So, well, that's a discrepancy. So actually, you're not being accurate. So actually, your claim is denied. And that's really kind of simplifying that situation. But the crux of the denial was on something as trivial as a day or a date that was maybe 1 or 2 days out. So yeah, it's a harsh process. And, the interviews can last anything from a couple of hours to some people have lasted days. The one of the shortest ones I've heard is about 6 hours, which to anyone is in, it's intense. It's a really, really tough mentally, to process that. So yeah, it's not easy at all.
Wow. That sounds tougher than a police interview. Wow. Yeah.
I'm so glad we've started here in talking about actually the people behind the statistics, as you put it, and the people and their stories. And just to recognise, before we start talking about some of the local reaction and response to some news stories that we're going to bring in, to recognise that from the statistics we're looking at, over 70% are given their status, or their asylum claim is approved, and then a further 50% of the remaining are approved. And this isn't people who are travelling through country to country or travelling to the UK just because, these are people who are facing persecution for various different reasons, who are fleeing war, who are fleeing, real harm. So I think that's really important to put that into context, that when we talk about perhaps the fear that people have of, new people coming into your town, it just, in my opinion, it really can't equate. It really can't compare to the actual experiences that people are claiming asylum for. And actually that voice, that side of the argument should be louder, but yeah.
I agree completely. And I think that that's part of this kind of educational side and information that should be shared publicly, is understanding what characteristics the refugee criteria entails. Because people have a perception, especially with what's happening with Ukraine right now. It's very, overt and easy to see exactly why people are coming. We have very strong media coverage of that. But when people are coming from South Sudan or Eritrea, and that's really, not reported on at all in our media, the perception is, well, there's not war there, so why are they coming? And people are easily, easy to think that if they can't see it, the situation is not happening. And people also feel that war is kind of one of the only reasons that people would have to flee and seek asylum or, become a refugee and have to leave their country. But there's so many more situations, personal persecution, whether it's based on faith, gender, ethnic groups. There's so much that kind of falls into the category of what makes you in this country, recognized as a refugee, that without the public understanding, it just fuels these kind of situations that I know that you want to kind of cover a little bit later.
Yeah. No, thanks, Courtney. I'm just trying to understand something, and it's probably a question from ignorance, and you may not have the answer, but I'll ask it anyway. In some ways, what the Home Office is doing, putting everyone in hotels. Mm-hmm. Is now, have I got this right? So people arrive in the country, they go through an initial screening, and that has to happen within so many hours or so many days or something like that. And that's what the camps down in, down near Dover and places like that were doing with the 4,000 people, 44,000 people in them, and so on. And that's that initial screening. And then after that, they had to go somewhere else, and the Home Office weren't managing to find enough places. And so that process, while they wait for that other interview, happens. They just put in hotels all over the place. Is that what's is happening, or have I misunderstood it?
No, I think it's difficult to understand it. So the process isn't necessarily firm. There's been a lot of movements, and especially since COVID. So I believe, so I kind of got involved in this in depth around the COVID time. So I'm not 100% sure what happened prior to COVID, but since COVID, that's where the hotels, because they weren't being used, there was a lot more availability to use that. And that's where this kind of system come into play. So the process of screening usually should happen within a certain amount of days, and should be quite immediate. And then they are sent to accommodation, which is now very commonly hotels, or, we've got university accommodation being used now, kind of different, Napier, the old barracks, is being used. So there are different structures of accommodation, but in general, it's hotels across the UK. However, at the moment, there seems to be a backlog with some people coming through and going straight into, so getting their basic processing, like their ID, their kind of paperwork completed at the receiving centre, and then they're being sent to accommodation and then being called back for screening. So there's that gap now where we're seeing people come through into the hotels that haven't even been screened yet and had their initial processing kind of interview. So there's no real rhyme or reason to this. We don't get any information, from the charity perspective as to exactly why the Home Office is doing things. We just often hear that there's a backlog, or it will happen. So we've got people that have been waiting a few weeks now to be processed, which is obviously then going to delay their substantive interview. So it just kind of has a knock-on effect. But in general, that is the process. And when people have been in hotel accommodation for some time, usually for families that have young children, they will then be kind of prioritised to be moved to something that the Home Office called dispersal accommodation, which is, it could be an apartment or a house or a shared house, something that's obviously a bit more suitable for people that have families and children that need, routine and some stability around going to school and things like that. And for people that have medical needs as well, they would be prioritised for a bit more suitable accommodation.
So sort of that really is very helpful. It paints a much clearer picture of a messy situation that isn't clear, but it helps understanding of what's trying to be done. And I think this is what the public don't understand, that they're not familiar with the process. They're not hearing the process very clearly, even though it probably is on some news channels or it is in some settings. It doesn't seem to carry across. So there's a situation here that came up in Dunstable and was widely publicized on the radio and so on. There's a couple of hotels that we know have have had people seeking asylum in them for a while. But recently, the main hotel in Dunstable, which has, you know, a 4-star hotel, has wedding bookings, has people doing their 80th birthday there, and all those kind of things, has been the owners have said, actually, we're going to put up people seeking asylum through the Home Office. We're going to take that contract, and they just cancelled all the bookings then and there, right across the board. So all the people who had bookings got irate, got onto the radio, made as much noise as they possibly could, got onto the MP, got onto attacking local councillors and other local councillors who want to get voted in May, got all involved in it all. And the whole thing's going up in a little bit of a noisy kind of football, but it's beginning to get some more settled look at it all. And my concern in it, living locally near the hotel, in some ways was, how is this going to help these people when they're moving into a strange place, and kind of the way it's been approached has been so crass and unthought through that it stirs up local opinion. It doesn't help those people be welcomed. And so my concerns initially was, this is really bad news for social cohesion, and it's really bad news for some of those things. But there's been a debate that took place, I think it was earlier this week, with councillors saying, you know, what is the town council going to do about this? And some were saying they should ban hotels from doing this and those kind of approaches, and they must keep their bars open, must do all these things. And the other side said, Dunstable is on the A5. It's got a long history of welcoming people. And actually, that needs to be the approach that's held to the fore, whether people have been here a week or been here 50 years or 60 years or whatever. Actually, there's a need to be welcoming and care for all people. And fortunately enough, that was the one that was voted through by the council, and that's the approach being taken by them. But there's still public meetings to discuss the finer points of it all. And all of that's been stirred up. And I know in areas like Luton as well, there's been a high number of refugees for the area. I think it's over 20% of the East's people seeking asylum have been put into Luton and surround. So some of our Dunstable might be included in that. But actually, that's a high proportion. And there seems to be very little thought in that about its impact locally and its impact on the people seeking asylum and their opinion of this new country they've just come into, and how people are towards them. You know, when they've been through tough times, it's very difficult to. I've changed country a couple of times. I know it's difficult when you do it well. when you're having to do it on your last dregs of trying to get across or get into a country, it must be very difficult. I don't know if either of you have any thoughts on that. Maybe that's something we can discuss around the Dunstable situation. Maybe it's something that can help bring some elements in that are needed in the whole picture of things.
I think it's just really a real example of how much the well-being of the people that are being placed in accommodation and the quantities how that's happening, it just has a real disregard for their well-being, and to be placed in areas which already face really high poverty levels. As you said, there seems to be no kind of sense in that. You know, places that are already really stretched for resources, places that already have their services overwhelmed, so that there's a backlog of accessing support services and all these kinds of things, where there isn't much available, like places for people to be and just kind of, you know, be and do things that are productive or enjoyable. And, you know, so the question is sort of why, where is the sense in that? And I think, you know, it's quite, we might have a private conversation and be a bit more open, but it's quite obvious that, you know, they're being placed where there is a certain demographic of people, so there's perceivably an easier sense of cohesion, and they're being placed perhaps where there are so hotels and accommodation, which are really struggling to survive because of the poverty in the area. So it's kind of exploiting that. It's exploiting the fact that these businesses need to have a viable option. And if they are block booking, a certain number of residents for a certain amount of time, then that is kind of taken advantage of without any real regard to the cohesion aspect of things, to how much pressure it puts on the local community. And that is in terms of the resources, all of the organising around how do we provide some sort of urgent support for the asylum seekers that are placed in Luton. All of that takes time and resource and energy from all the local charities and things like that. And so I don't think there's any real regard of that. And especially since, as we know, people can be up and moved out and relocated somewhere completely different at a moment's notice. It's first and foremost, the effect on those individuals is paramount, but also the reality of all of the resources and all of the connections and community building that's happened in that location is now essentially gone to waste and has to be done all over again in that new location. So it doesn't make a lot of sense, and there's a lot of problems with it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you've raised some really kind of important points. And in my opinion, the financial element is absolutely a driver behind the locations that receive. So like you said, in areas that are already experiencing poverty and maybe the local authorities are, low on funds and things like that, the local businesses, I think, similar to what the situation in Dunstable is, I think that there's not enough kind of examination of the fact that the actual owners of this hotel have taken that decision to accept the contract. It's not a case that the Home Office have forced them into it. They've offered a very lucrative deal and they've taken that opportunity. And I think that, as a business owner, you've got that decision to make. Yes, obviously to secure your income, but you are essentially in control of that. You could explore other avenues and things like that. So I think that I find it very frustrating that all of the flack kind of comes towards the people that are being moved into the hotel out of their choice. And there's not much kind of, exploration or, investigation into the side of things where someone is accepting this contract, someone is agreeing to these terms and taking this money. And I did read an article a few months ago that explained hotels that have taken on these contracts have made 6 times more profit than they did before COVID. So these contracts are lucrative, they are attractive, and that is what I think the Home Office has on their side that's allowing, this kind of non-logical, just confusing system of where people are placed. I think the impact in Luton is, I think Luton is a very special place. I think that there's not many places in the UK that has this level of community and actually support and really kind of interconnected, just a support system through charities, through communities, people, different people from diverse backgrounds and things like that. So to come into Luton is not actually that difficult of a transition for people I've found in the past couple of years. People tend to be able to find, a community of sorts, that might speak their language, that is from their country, shops that sell things from home for many different nationalities. So it's not one of the worst places for people to be placed. However, the strain and the disproportionate allocation of people in this small town is what is challenging, because things like schools, like GPs, like all different services are massively strained, and then that does impact public opinion. But luckily, I would expect that there wouldn't be too much comeback similar to the situation in Dunstable. Well, in contrast to the situation in Dunstable. There hasn't been that much public kind of, I'm trying to think of the opposite of cohesion, but anyway, there's not that much public,
discord.
There we go, discord around, the fact that people are here. So, yeah, I think that the financial side of things is something that people should really, put at the forefront of when you're trying to understand why this is happening. And I think just one more thing to add to this experience of being placed in a hotel, something I see a lot in the public forum and, on social media is, people are coming here, they're getting put up in a 4 or 5 star hotel, they're, everything's paid for. the experience of living in a hotel for an undisclosed amount of time, often now in a shared occupancy room, because the Home Office are even in a hotel that is not meant to be shared occupancy, they're putting bunk beds in, they're kind of redesigning the hotel to have a higher occupancy. And this could be in a shared room with people you don't know, people that don't speak your language, people that are traumatized. Everyone has experienced some sort of trauma, and you have no privacy and things like that. To have no kind of funds to be able to go out and leave and take journeys maybe into London or anywhere else to see other friends and families that you might be connected with. So you are kind of isolated to the area that you're staying, has a really detrimental impact. And on top of that, the food that's provided, it's not like when we go to a hotel and you get your breakfast buffet and things like that. There are caterers that are contracted, and one of the most common things that we hear is that the food is not culturally adapted or sensitive. It's microwave meals, or they come in plastic containers. The quality is not good. We've had reports and evidence of food being given that's out of date. We've had, people have food poisoning and things like that. So there's really not much care that goes into the kind of catering side of things either. And if you have no funds to be able to, or facilities to cook for yourself, it's just a really, really bad experience. It's not roses, and it's not, you're in a 5-star hotel living in luxury.
Yeah. I've just, there was a meeting, a public meeting, to basically discuss all of this locally in Dunstable. And one of the answers coming from our local MP here was that an allowance of £9.10 per week is provided to cover any essentials not provided by the Home Office. And they've got a company running that. The accommodation provider comes, provides those living in the hotels with a debit card where £9.10 is uploaded on a weekly base. And you're thinking £9.10, is that for toiletries? That's for toiletries. Is that for all the different things you need? That's quite a tiny amount to stretch out.
It's minuscule, and it's provided by the Home Office. So it's not the accommodation providers that do that. It is actually the government allowance for people that are seeking asylum and based in hotel accommodation. And it's for everything outside of, food and accommodation. If you need phone credit to obviously be connected to your family, you need to use that £9.10 per week to do that. If you're having serious issues with the food, we have tried to escalate and try and, make a difference in the food that's offered in many hotels, but it really doesn't yield much response. So if you're not eating the food that's in the hotels for many reasons, you have to, sustain yourself from that funding. If you need clothing, if you need, shoes, if you need to travel for a Home Office appointment, say, for example, you are required to go to Croydon at the processing centre for any reason, you must fund that out of your £9.10 per week. There is no allowance for that. There's no provision for things like that. So, yes, it's a tiny amount of money, and it's only recently increased. It was £8 per week up until I think the past couple of months, maybe the beginning of this year, they've changed. I think this is in line with the cost of living crisis. It's not a lot at all. It's not.
I wonder how they arrive at that amount. So I won't go into the detail, but you sort of think, wow, that's tiny. But also that's all part of, was it 6 million a day the government say they're spending, but that's been taken out of our overseas aid budget. And so there's nations overseas who could be getting help that aren't getting it because that's just been taken from that. And so there's things like this. Money's been moved around and swapped around. And like you say, the following the money shows the story a little bit in this. And I think, I think this is fascinating, just trying to think of what it's like to be in those settings, living on that amount. I think, that really brings the humanity of it really home, doesn't it? When you're thinking nappies, for families and caring for families, and it then also puts these people in a vulnerable position when it comes to exploitation. And you've got reports in the press saying that people have just disappeared from places because organized criminal gangs have basically persuaded them that they'll be sent somewhere else, and all of this, and managed to use clever language and manipulation as they do to get people on board and whisked away into human trafficking and horrendous things, I imagine. Is that something, am I naive on that, or is that something that has been happening with people in need and difficulties?
Yeah, I think we do hear a lot of reports and information. For one of the charities that I support is a national charity. So in the Luton area, I haven't been made aware of many situations in terms of the organised, criminal activity and people being kind of exploited in that sense. But I know that it happens, and regionally, yeah, exactly as you described, is an issue. And I think something that is a very easy way for people to kind of exploit and use, like you said, that clever language to be able to convince people that this is their only option, is the Nationality and Borders Bill, the Rwanda policy that they're trying to, push forward. And that really does cause a lot of fear for people. Even the mention of Rwanda now, not even in any context, I find that it really does stir up a lot of questions, a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress. So if that is what these organized groups are using to kind of attract and lure people into looking at a way to avoid that, it's dangerous. It's a really dangerous situation.
I'm a bit of a fan of historical podcasts, and there have been many schemes like this through the history, and none of them have worked. So I think we won't go into all the politics of that, but I think there's some of these things where those threats are really cruelly used by people, and people use things cruelly to get their own ends sometimes, and I think it's building relationship connection that helps break down some of these vulnerabilities. If people are less isolated, they're more connected, they're more part of something, they've got a hope in the future in some ways. Those things help create a security. Are there ways that that's being done in this? I mean, I know I've heard of loads of churches locally here in Dunstable that have people finding their way to the churches from the hotels and things like that. And the churches have been wonderfully welcoming, helping them with clothing, helping with different things like that. I know the same thing from chatting to Melissa is happening in Luton with many charities and churches and mosques and other organizations very involved. I don't know, is if either of you want to comment some more on that, but I see that as a protection against exploitation. I see that as actually really helping some of the vulnerabilities in this, and people make connection.
It definitely is trying to help build some resilience, because when we have vulnerable people who are already extremely vulnerable from the circumstances they're seeking asylum for, and then they are moved from place to place. So any community, any connection that is being built potentially over a year. We saw the stories of people going to college, accessing medical support and things like that, and then being shipped across the country. All of that, removes any sort of protective structures that they would have in terms of safeguarding. Having the housing situation as it is, having very limited resources outside of that, all of that opens the door for exploitation and abuse. So all this work that's being done, on the basic level, people opening their doors and saying, you're welcome to be here is so important, and that's why it's really important that where these asylum seekers are placed is really vital to their whole well-being, and the whole the safeguarding aspect in order to make sure that these people are actually safeguarded and aren't put at an even more unnecessary risk. All of these kind of factors need to be taken into account. Just on the level of clothes, if those kind of practical items can be provided, there's one less thing that can be kind of dangled as an exploitative sort of temptation to take advantage of people with. And yeah, there's a lot, as sort of you both mentioned, a lot happening in Luton in terms of trying to meet the need for English language classes that people are often requesting. I know there's a lot of different projects that have started in trying to do sort of conversational projects, a more entertainment side of things, and just having a space to be and come and sort of have a cup of coffee. Because like I think Courtney said, you know, if all you have is that hotel and there is no privacy and you have no money to go and actually access anything that requires spending money when you're there, just having the open doors is really important.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that even, you know, the kind of social interaction and open door and welcoming that people need sometimes is so low level, in the sense of it's just someone to have one conversation with, maybe exchange phone number or something, some form of contact, and that opens a wide door in terms of asking questions about things. Oh, I was approached by someone about this. Does this seem right? You know, just things that, you know, people might fall into that side of exploitation because they don't have someone to question something about, or, you know, to just check and sense check. And I think that's what I find when I do my work, and I share my number with pretty much everyone. And I get many questions that just, it could be the most random thing, but it's something that now thinking about this and in this conversation, if they didn't have my input or my opinion or my guidance on, oh, actually here we do things like this, or it's like, you know, this is what this means, who knows where that could go. So, yeah, I think it's really important.
And we've spoken to people who've been sort of in Luton for months and not connected with any service yet. You know, don't know, you know, who the charities are, where those open doors are, and what services are available. And that, I think, just is reflective of the quantity of people, the amount of people that are here, that even when some of these services, some of these open doors and events and things are fully booked, that's still not reaching everyone who needs it. And I think that the worst part of that is that actually the most vulnerable people who might be really struggling with their mental health, really struggling with, you know, just being able to get out and meet new people, they're the people who are probably we're really not reaching. And obviously it's a good thing that we see often a lot of the same few faces who really try to just kind of come out and help out as much as they can and be involved as much as they can. And that's, you know, shows huge resilience for taking that kind of action. But we know there must be so many more who even struggle to access what is available. Yeah.
And I think it's when I was a teenager, I did some basic first aid training, and they said if you came across a car accident, who would you go to first? And actually, it's not the person screaming that's always the person that needs the attention first. It's sometimes the quieter ones on the side. And I think there, you know, some people will always get their attention, get their voice heard, and they'll fight for it and they'll get through. Others sometimes more traumatized, more needy. And I think for me, that's where my heart goes out. I think there must be people silently going through so much. I've recently made contact with some local refugees that we've been helping, and the husband, very capable people. If they were in the UK society, they would be upper middle class at least. You know, very talented, very educated, but having to start at the bottom rung of the ladder and work up. And I've sat and chatted to him, and he's shown me the photos on his phone of what they've been through. And I mean, bullet holes in cars and things like this. And actually, you know, and his focus was on something else, but I could see some of the things and you just realize the gravity. But it's not always the people shouting about it. You know, the person was talking to is more concerned about their wife than anything. But actually, I know that I need to take and go for a walk with him, just to give him a chance to get outside of his normal day to day. And so I'm planning that for next week. But actually, there's some of these things where I think it's a silence. It's sometimes those things where there's deep need for things to come out. And I don't know if you've got any comments on that. We'll probably bring this a bit to a landing point, but just any comments you think that might be wise for people listening.
Yeah, I think as you described, something as, you know, small for us in terms of just going for a walk and being really kind of receptive and understanding of those differences, that actually when people are reserved and quiet, it might not be that they're just shy by nature. Actually, in this context, they've been through massive trauma, and that could be really, eating away at them in a way that they can't express or seek help. So it's kind of putting that gesture forward just to be a friend and be kind. And I think, as much as the people that are confident and that do come regularly to events and, are outspoken about things, present their case, there's still underlying things with them as well. This week, I was approached by someone that is one of those confident people that does come to me a lot and come out to events. And he was really struggling to make contact with some solicitors. And I said, well, you've had this list since last year. I sent it to you and I've asked if you needed help. And he said, actually, I seem like, I'm capable of doing these things, but I can't sleep, I don't eat, I'm at home, I cry and things like that. And it was just a really stark reminder that actually, even if people are confident and seem very capable, with the level of trauma and, added trauma from this system that people are going through is really difficult. So if you can, get involved with a local organisation or charity and just befriend somebody, there's a lot of value in that. Don't disregard that as something that is massively helpful.
I'm so glad you said that. And I was thinking, as you guys have been talking for the last few minutes, that we've jumped from different angles of how people claiming asylum and refugees are spoken about, how they're viewed, the misinformation and misconceptions around it. And when we talk in almost the abstract so often, it can be really easy for anyone working, responding to trying to support people claiming asylum. It can be really easy to forget the people side of it, to just see people as a list of sort of adjectives or a list of needs or a list of vulnerabilities. But just like I would want people to always view me as a whole person, each and every individual that we interact with or that we try to support is a whole person with, as you said, Nigel, a whole life and history and background of expertise and experience. And that can range in so many ways. And as you said, they'd have so much to offer to Luton, to British society, with that expertise as well. I think it's just worth mentioning, so Courtney and I, with various hats on, have been working together for a while and coordinating some support for asylum seekers. Obviously at FACES, we deliver safeguarding training, we deliver CSE training, child sexual exploitation training and identity inclusion training. And we're working on a bespoke safeguarding course for people who are working with people claiming asylum and refugees, so doing any kind of response to that. And the course is an advanced safeguarding course. So it'll be looking at real specific vulnerabilities, specific forms of abuse that happen, bringing in the element of how our bias and how our kind of social norms can influence the way that we work and how we can overcome some of those barriers, and take into account, a lot of the easily done mistakes that can happen when you're engaging with such a vulnerable community. And we're really looking forward to being able to offer that out to, lots of charities, churches, mosques, organisations that are responding in some way. So please do get in touch with us. Our main email is admin@faces.org.uk, and it'd be really good to see how we can line up that support and deliver that, widely across Luton and surrounding areas over the next coming months.
Yeah. Thanks. I sort of think when I've got someone who's got knowledge and wisdom and experience of things beyond my own, I love to pick their brains and try and understand some more. And I just think probably a tough question. I don't want to put you on the spot too much, Courtney, but I really appreciate you coming. I really appreciate what you've shared. I feel enriched by what you've shared. I feel my knowledge has grown. And actually, I think that's been so helpful. But for you working in this field, there must be some things I wish the public knew this better, or I wish people understood this more. And so sort of like, sort of trying to get a view from your shoulders in a way. How are there things that you long the public knew more about? And also, are there some people listening to this who may be involved a little bit with refugees? Are there some good charities you know of, or other places that you think would be good to point people to? Faces, I mean, we're well up for being contacted. I know of a few charities as well, but I just wondered, just from your advice, from your wisdom, because you've studied this stuff, you know this stuff. I'm just wondering, is there something you wish the general public knew more about?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's vital that the public have further information and knowledge on this, because as a whole, it's difficult to pinpoint one or two specific things. I think I really long for the public to understand what refugeedom is, what is a refugee, who is a refugee, because technically, from the point that you flee your country, the minute you cross a border for any reason of persecution, you are a refugee. It's not something that is given to you or taken away. The biggest difference is each country has different criteria that they use to recognize you as a refugee, but you are a refugee. So understanding that would hopefully shift the perspective of, well, these people are illegal migrants, these people are, economic migrants, all of these kind of buzz terms and, terminology that is used by the media, by the government, to kind of distort the fact that people are refugees. If you have had to flee your country because of persecution, you're a refugee. And it comes down to the fact that, when you get into a country, so when you reach the UK, we have our own process for recognizing that, and that is the asylum process. But essentially, it's just understanding that this process, everyone is due and everyone, should be given the opportunity to do that. It's not people exploiting a system. If fairness gives you the chance of claiming asylum in any state, and you should have your case heard. I'm not really making this point very clearly, but I just wish for people to understand that side of things a little bit better, so they can know that actually people are facing persecution. And the biggest thing for me that I see that is incorrect is the fact that people say, oh, well, illegal, the legality, the issues of legality about how you come into the country and how this works. And the UK has ratified the 1951 Refugee Convention. I'm not trying to get too technical, but that is the legislation that we have agreed to as a country to follow. And follow the rules. And it's clear in there, it's absolutely clear that refugees cannot be persecuted for the way they enter a country seeking safety. And that's it. You cannot punish, because, people say, well, they're here illegally, but then why is no one in detention? No one has actually been arrested. No one is in prison for the way they've entered the country, because it is not illegal to enter the country by any means if you are seeking asylum and you're fleeing persecution. So that actually probably is the strongest point that I want to make. Is that actually you can't, people are not illegal anyway. But further to that, the way that you enter a country does not determine your legality to be here or not.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And I think, it's very difficult to enter anywhere the terms that are used manage to twist everything around and present a picture. But if you just look at it as refugees, it's very clear. And I think that's we've hidden things behind language, maybe for various points, but we won't get into the deeper politics of that. But I think it's just loving people. And I think that's and keeping people human in front of our eyes, not dehumanizing government guys who say we're having this hotel or the other side of it. Actually, there's something that needs to be in us as human beings that cares for one another. And I think that's so important. But thank you both. We'll put some resources up. And maybe a couple of charities people can get in touch with underneath this podcast. But thank you both. Thank you so much, Courtney, for joining us and giving us your expertise, your wisdom, and insights. It's been very helpful. And thanks, Melissa, as well. All the best.